Welcome. Welcome to the 37th Annual Sulock Memorial Economics Crystal Ball. It's so great to be together in person again, and even for those that are virtual, but isn't it nice to see people's faces and enjoy a glass of wine and even eat a little bit of food together. It has been a long time. It's been too long. We love seeing your smiling faces. We love the energy and the buzz in the air. We love the sense of community. And I think all of us are here because we love this university, don't we? We know everything, the topic on everyone's minds is the economy and the markets. And we've got some splendid young men to educate us tonight. But my name is Tate Groome, co-CEO of Colton Groome Financial, along here with my brother, Matt. We're humbled to be the sponsor tonight for this evening's event. If you don't know much about us, Colton Groome Financial, we're a locally owned, independent financial services firm. We're third generation. Our company was founded in 1950. Again, this guy right here, our third generation. We've got an emphasis on multi-generational families and closely held businesses. We help clients discover what's possible. We pride ourselves on bringing national resources to our local community and being a fiduciary that is proactive, keeps our clients organized, and follows through on our promises.
Dr. Tatum and Emily, I know you put a lot of time, energy, and effort into tonight, so thank you for making this happen. When we were approached to sponsor tonight's evening, it was simple. Yes. And why? Because UNC Asheville has been so great to our family, our business, and our community. First, our family, our mother, Barbara, who unfortunately is not here tonight, was educated at UNC Asheville and used her degree to teach for 21 years at Asheville Middle School. Our father, George, has been involved in various roles and committees and helped found the Family Business Forum here. For our business, Dr. Mary Manns, prior to her, it's just been tremendous. And when you think about the university, Dr. Cable and athletic director Janet Cohn are just amazing advocates for the students and student athletes out there. So it was simple, yes. What also made it that much sweeter is the Sulock family. I see Dot back there. We grew up with the Sulock family, and just to continue that legacy and memory means a lot. So, but one of the real reasons we actually wanted to sponsor tonight's event was this crystal ball.
We have our own crystal ball.
Right. This is the crystal ball that sits in the Colton Groome boardroom. And so we wanted to compare our crystal ball to David and Jim's crystal ball. So we're looking forward to it. I don't know if anybody can notice this, but you see our crystal ball, guys? It's pretty clear.
And it's really heavy.
Yeah. And one of the reasons we feel like our crystal ball is so clear is we try to focus on things we can control and create meaningful dialogue around the things we can't control, but we know. So Donald Rumsfeld called that the known knowns and the known unknowns, right? Our planning team focuses on values, goals, life events, while also aligning your means with your meaning. We know retirement will happen. We know we're all going to pass away. We know we might sell a business. We know markets might go up, down, sideways. But we don't know when those things are going to happen, and that can create anxiety and uncertainty. Our crystal ball, which is our planning process, in combination with our 72 years of real life experiences, models these types of events through our planning software so our clients can understand and visually see what the outcome of these potential known and unknown events could be. And after seeing the impact of any one or combination of these events, they understand what adjustments or actions they need to take to keep their financial plan on track. So rest assured, we've got a great team of chartered financial analysts and certified financial planners at Colton Groome, many of who are here tonight, and combined with our investment committee, are looking at the economic and market data every single day to shape investment allocations. But most importantly, make sure those investments are aligned with your financial plan. So ultimately, we believe an overall plan that models known and unknown events combined with the expert investment team leads to a clear crystal ball. And that brings peace of mind, especially during uncertain times. So guys, we're really looking forward to seeing what your crystal ball says and comparing it to ours. So thank you to Dr. Tatum, Jim, David, Emily for making tonight's event, and pleasure to be a part of it.
You need me to leave this up here for you guys?
Yes. Oh, great to have props. I love it. Greetings. My name is Robert Tatum. I'm the Cary Caperton Owen Professor of Economics here at UNC Asheville. Let me add my warm welcome to Colton Groome. Welcome UNC Asheville students, faculty, staff, alumni. It was so great to see so many alumni here. Our Colton Groome financial friends and the greater Asheville community, both online and in person to this, the 37th annual Joseph M. Sulock Memorial Economics Crystal Ball Seminar. Now, many of you know, because many of you have probably been here for a number of these, this was held in person for 35 years. Last year it was held online. This year is the first year it's held simultaneously online and in person. And if your friends didn't heed your advice and they're not here, hopefully there'll be a recording of it. That is the plan that we will get out to you all as well. And even David's famous slides will actually be made available to folks online after this is over, so we'll be happy to share that with you. Let me also say how grateful the UNC Asheville Economics Department is for the generous support Colton Groome Financial has provided to make this event possible. We could not have done this without them. We are also grateful to the Economics Department Administrative Assistant, Emily Herzog, and 3 student assistants and some other workers here for their hard work in making this event possible. You all saw the cue I was about to give you, and you did it anyway, so that's great. So yes, please do that. There's a few things I want to say before we get to the main event. One of them is I would like to talk a little bit about Dr. Sulock, who developed and organized this event for 35 years. Of the countless efforts Dr. Sulock made in supporting students in the Asheville community, I don't know which one he would most want to be remembered. I do, however, know the untold times he came into my office or met me for lunch to make sure that I would keep the department scholarships and awards program going strong. I'm a little emotional on this, I'm sorry. I mention this here, though, because his legacy of raising funds for the department scholarships dovetails nicely with his legacy for this event. Over the years, David Berson and Jim Smith have generously donated their crystal ball speaking fees and more to scholarship funds for UNC Asheville economics majors. Others of you have joined them. In fall 2020, at their request, the fund was renamed in Joe's memory, and grateful alumni and friends added to that fund. If you would like to honor Joe's memory and build on this legacy, there is room for you. Utilize the donation card, this one, that you can take home with you and do at your convenience. Utilize this so you can make a difference in our students' lives. And I can give you countless stories on that of people in this room and elsewhere. Now, this is the second year I am emceeing this fantastic event. Last year, you probably don't remember, but I actually referenced a 1980s sitcom called Golden Girls in my introduction.
Yeah, yes, you did.
Yeah, oh my word. So, since the Economic Crystal Ball series, though, began in the early 80s, and since I am a child of that decade, I am going to draw inspiration this evening from another 80s sitcom, namely The Facts of Life, which Emily says was a truly awful show, but anyway, I've already stuck with this in here. I should have
You already wrote it down.
I've already got it down here. Now, you may not remember all the antics of Blair, Joe, Natalie, Tootie, and their house mother, Mrs. Garrett. But if you're a child of the 80s, you're going to remember the theme song. It begins, I'm not going to sing it. You take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. The facts of life. Now, in today's good news, U.S. real GDP grew at 5.7% in 2021. And the U.S. unemployment rate currently stands at 3.6%. We have not seen such economic growth since 1984, or since the midpoint of the sixth season of Facts of Life, if you prefer to measure time that way. Among the bad news, 30-year fixed mortgage rates recently spiked to an average of 5% this last week, and consumer prices have risen 8.5% over the last 12 months. The latter we have not seen since December 1981, or put differently, since the third season midpoint of the Facts of Life. Now, as their theme song goes, though, the world never seems to be living up to its dreams. I don't have to tell you all that the last few years were not what we expected them to be, and looking through my crystal ball at least. Perhaps because of that, many of us have a sense of foreboding. In fact, consumer sentiment fell 18.2% in February from what it was 1 year earlier. We believe, just like Tootie often warned, there's gonna be trouble. Yet here we are with the wisdom of Mrs. Garrett, David Berson, and Jim Smith, who will share with us some of the facts of our economic and financial lives and give us some timely advice. So I need to stop my talk so they can talk. So I'm going to first welcome to the podium Dr. David Berson. Let me say a few words about him before he comes up here. Many of you all know about him, but he is the Senior Vice President and Chief Economist at Nationwide Insurance, where his responsibilities involve a team of economists who act as internal consultants to the company's business units. Among his previous professional positions, David was Vice President and Chief Economist at Fannie Mae, President and Fellow of the National Association of Business Economics, and a Senior Manager with Wharton Econometrics Forecasting. Now, about Dave and Jim, I'll talk a little bit more about Jim later, but about both of them together, Joe Sulock would always say to me that they are top-notch business economists, experts who pour through the data to give us excellent sense of where the economy's heading. Even as an economist myself, I will be sitting on the edge of my seat to hear what David and Jim have to say about where the economy is going. After Jim and David present, as you all may know, they will answer questions from the audience. So I do have a question already, though, for David. I've talked enough about the early 80s with its high growth and high inflation and other things that we're probably not experiencing now, like geopolitical risk. So my question to you is this. Would you bring us back to the future to give us the facts of our economic and financial lives now and some sense of where things may be going? So I welcome back Dr. Berson.
Rob, thank you. I've never been introduced before along with the facts of life. I hope never to be again. You never know. It is so good to be back here and see all of you. We all miss Joe a lot. Joe was the person behind all this. The golf today with Joe's regular golfing partners and I would come and play. He hoisted a beer for him at lunch. One of Joe's great loves of life is beer. So we had to do that for him. But it's so good to be back here and see all of you. Let's do it again. All right. What's going on? Lots of things are going on. Are we going to go into recession? Is this back to the 70s with inflation? Is it recession and inflation? I haven't seen that for a long time. That's a bad one. So I've got some slides that I'm going to show you that I actually showed to our board of directors 2 weeks ago. It went so well, I thought, I have an even better audience. So crystal ball. So here we are. It's interesting. It's supposed to be another slide. Oh well, doesn't matter. The best news I can give you, and this is great news, is that new infection rates for COVID are very low now. Doesn't mean that COVID is gone. It is still here. It is still deadly, particularly for people who have not been vaccinated at all. But between about 76% of the population has been inoculated, and some unknown share that now has natural immunity because they got COVID. A substantial portion of the US population that has, to some degree or another, developed the ability not to die from COVID. And ultimately, that was the whole point behind all the things we went through to get to now. So this chart shows data. It's a couple of weeks old at this point. And there's a new Omicron variant that's pushing this up a little bit. I guess the good news is each of the recent variants, while easier to get, more transmissible than previous versions, is harder to die from. Again, that's the point. So the impact on the economy from each of the succeeding variants is becoming less and less. And that is fabulous news for the economy. Well, there's other good news, we'll talk about that, but there's bad news as well. We know that Russia has invaded Ukraine. Bad news geopolitically, bad news economically as well. I'm gonna play Professor Berson in a couple of minutes. Do some fun codes to neighbors. It's great. You'll love it. There's a blue book under your chairs, so you'll be able to, in fact, do the answers to the quiz you're gonna get. If you don't pass, you won't be able to leave. And they're locking the doors right now, so you have to take the exam. So pay attention. The most immediate thing that we have seen from the Russian invasion of Ukraine was a further spike in oil prices. Now, you can see that oil prices went up substantially before the Russian invasion, but that's pushed it up still more. Oil prices, I didn't actually check what they were today, but they're around $105 per barrel for West Texas Intermediate, pretty high. Gasoline prices, a few weeks ago, in nominal terms, were the highest ever in the United States. Come down a little bit since then. But on the other hand, crude oil prices have gone up, so gasoline prices will probably go up again. We're seeing a supply shock. We haven't seen many supply shocks in recent decades. We saw a lot of them in the 70s and 80s. We'll talk about that. The supply shocks both slow the economy and boost inflation. That's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing it with other commodity prices as well. Here are wheat prices. Again, spiked after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. They started to go up before, but not seriously. Oil was going up because the world economy was expanding again in 2020, second half of 2020, and in 2021. But supply didn't keep up with that increased demand. Supply and demand. Demand goes up, supply goes up by less, prices rise. And then we had the Russian invasion. With some of these other commodities, we had the same thing, but more of them were tied to what's happening now, the Russian invasion. Russia and Ukraine are among the very largest exporters in the entire world of wheat. So how much wheat will be harvested in Ukraine this year? Some. The western part of the country is very agricultural, but much less than normal. Russia will harvest grain, but many countries won't buy it. It will sit and probably go bad. And so effectively, we've had a significant reduction in what is likely to be a wheat crop in the world for 2022, pushing prices up. Lots of other commodity prices have gone up as well. Things that are important. Neon goes into lasers that help make computer chips, that make lots of the things we buy. Autos. Hard to buy a car because there aren't enough chips. We need more computer chips. Well, we need more of those neon lamps. Russia and Ukraine are substantial exporters of those. So there are lots of things, commodities, that are affected by this, pushing up prices and slowing growth in the economy. Well, the Fed has noticed, finally, that inflation has gone up. Inflation had been moving up, but it's really spiked this year. As Rob said, 12-month change in consumer price index from last month was 8.5%. Fastest pace since December of 1981. I remember working in the White House as an economist as inflation was going up, 79, 80. Weren't quite sure what we could do to slow it. But we knew what we could do. You can put the kibosh on economic activity, and that is absolutely going to slow inflation. The real key is, how do you slow inflation without killing the economy? We'll talk about that and see if it's possible. But the Fed has noticed inflation and decided, we should bring it down too much. They almost certainly should have recognized this earlier, but they didn't. But they've recognized it now. You will note two red dots on this chart. They represent the Fed's own forecasts as of the middle of March of where it thinks the federal funds rate, which is what the Fed uses to conduct monetary policy, will be at the end of this year and the end of next year. End of this year, maybe if you look at the range, 1.75%. And when they did these forecasts, federal funds rate was 0. In the end of next year, about 2.75%. So 175 basis point increase rates this year, another 100 next year. That's so last month. The line, we're going to put it here. The line represents where financial markets think the federal funds rate will be. Note that it's above where the Fed thinks it's going to be. By the end of this year, financial markets think the federal funds rate 2.25%, 2.5%. By the end of next year, 3.25%, substantially higher than what the Fed thought a month ago. My guess is the Fed thinks today that it will tighten monetary policy by more than it thought a month ago. Indeed, you can hardly escape the financial press talking about Fed governors and regional bank presidents saying, well, we need to front load tightening, we need 50 basis points, we need 75 basis points. Jim Bullard at St. Louis Fed saying, we need 3.5 by the end of the year. We probably won't get 3.5 by the end of the year, but they're at least talking about it. The president of the San Francisco Fed, one of the leading delegates, talked today about, well, you tighten by 25, 50, 75 basis points. 75 is a lot for any one tightening. 50 is a lot. We haven't had a 50 basis point tightening in decades. Normally the Fed is more incremental when it starts to tighten monetary policy, but perhaps not this time. So one thing we know for sure, this is your crystal ball, the Fed will push short-term interest rates up a lot. How much really still isn't known, but it's going to be a lot. That will impact long-term rates. Think about long-term interest rates. There are three things that impact long-term interest rates. The first is short-term rates. I've talked in the last 25 years as I've been here, I've talked about this. Let's say you've got a 10-year investment horizon. You want a really safe investment. You buy a 10-year treasury. Presumably that's perfectly safe. But you could buy a 1-year treasury and then roll it over 9 times. Think short-term rates are going to move up a lot. Maybe they'll move up above the 10-year rate. Then you won't buy the 10-year. You need the 10-year to go up in yield. People aren't going to buy it. The price goes down, the yield goes up, so 10-year rates go up. Same thing happens when the Fed eases monetary policy. The second thing that affects long-term rates, expected inflation. When you buy a bond, you're loaning the bond seller money. could be a corporation, it could be the federal government, it could be another government. You're loaning the money. You're getting repaid in the future. You want the repayment in dollars that are worth more than they are today. You don't want inflation to go up and eat up all of those future bond payments. So if you think inflation is going to go up, then you're going to demand a higher rate today. Then the third, that affects long-term interest rates, supply and demand, economics, everything's supply. What do we know about that? Well, we know that the federal budget deficit is really big, but it's fallen substantially from where it was. So the federal government is selling a lot fewer bonds than it thought it would, than the market thought it would. That's a positive. Supply's not going up as quickly. On the other hand, the other thing the Federal Reserve did to help really boost the economy out of the COVID recession, what the Fed calls quantitative easing. Once the Fed brings the federal funds rate down to zero, in theory it could bring rates below zero. Terrible idea. You never want negative interest rates. You don't really want zero interest rates, but negative is just awful. We have a whole seminar on that. But the Fed wanted to do more, so it bought longer term Treasury securities, such as the 10-year, to boost liquidity in the economy. It bought up effectively all the treasuries that were being sold in 2020 and 2021. But now, as of a month ago, the Fed is no longer buying those longer term treasuries and mortgage-backed securities, putting downward pressure on mortgage rates. The private sector has to step in. If it doesn't, then less demand, prices go down, yields go up. So all these things suggest that long-term rates should rise. So now we're going to play Econ 101. Or maybe it's Econ 201, intermediate macroeconomics. We're going to do supply and demand. And really, it's so easy in economists for me. Inflation and economic growth. Inflation's on the vertical axis, growth's on the horizontal axis. What did the economy look like in the years leading up to the COVID recession? Well, for a number of years, economic growth was relatively stable, and so was inflation. Inflation averaged about just slightly under 2%, 1.8%. Growth averaged slightly over 2%, 2.1%. We would have liked faster growth. Inflation, actually, I would have preferred slower inflation, but interestingly, the Fed wanted a bit more inflation. Don't get me started on that. But basically, we were very stable with around 2% inflation and 2% growth. And then COVID. COVID was also a supply shock. Well, COVID's just a hit on supply. The government, in order to try to save lives, whether it was a correct call or not, shut things down. So at the same time that we had this big supply shock, see the supply curve moving up and to the left, higher inflation, less growth. We also had the government shutting down large parts of the economy, particularly the services sector, moving the demand curve to the left. So we got a double hit on economic growth. Minus 31.2% at the bottom. Now, it didn't last long, but that's a depression level drop in economic growth. I don't say that lightly. A depression level drop in growth. Inflation, negative, minus 3.4%. Most recessions, you don't get negative inflation. You might get lower inflation, you'll get negative inflation. You get negative inflation in depressions. And the combination of COVID and the government's response gave us that biggest one-quarter drop in GDP ever. Fortunately, It didn't last long. What did we get after that? We got the biggest expansionary monetary and fiscal policy that we've ever seen. We got a little healing on supply chains, but not much. Basically, we had the demand curve just shift way to the right. Growth picked up tremendously. 9.6% growth on average between the third quarter of 2020 and the first quarter of this year. Tremendous amount of growth. Considering for almost a decade, growth averaged 2%, we had almost 5 times that. And inflation went up to 5.6% over the average over this period. We know that the most recent number is 8.5%. The supply curve has not moved back. Maybe a tad. Maybe it's moved back the other way because of Russia-Ukraine. We'll see that in a minute. But maybe it's also moved back the other way because China has had a resurgence in COVID. And they're locking down entire cities. Shanghai, locked down. Huge city, much bigger than any city in the United States. Other huge cities that are production centers in China locked down. It's what they do. We didn't quite go that far, but it's what they do. So we had this huge surge in inflation because we had too much growth relative to the amount that can be supplied in the economy. Where are we today? Well, these are numbers that Rob gave. 12-month change in inflation, last number, 8.5%. Real GDP growth. Fourth quarter number, we get the first quarter number next week. Over the last year, up 5.5%. 5.5 is pretty good. 8.5 isn't so good. Way too high. So, what's going to happen here? Well, we know that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is another supply shock. It acts to push that supply curve up to the left, slowing growth, raising inflation. The increase in COVID in China's lockdown of it in China, supply shock, slows economic growth, pushes inflation up. On the other hand, some supply chains are healing. We're getting more computer chips. It's a slow process. So the aggregate supply curve, that's not moving up as much as, not nearly as much as we saw when COVID hit initially, but it's not moving down. And when the Fed talked about inflation being transitory, it didn't mean it would be over like that. What they meant was, over time, supply chains would heal, and that supply curve would move back to the right. And we get more growth and lower inflation. And we might have gotten a little of that, but it's been offset, more than offset, by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and now the new COVID outbreak in China. So it's not at all clear that the aggregate supply curve is going to move very much down and to the right, helping spur growth and lower inflation. It will eventually. Supply chains will heal, but it might be next year, perhaps even the year after that, before we see supply chains fully heal. About demand, we had unprecedented fiscal expansion, tax cut after tax cut, government spending program after government spending program. But we had a depression level of economic growth, at least briefly. We had the Fed providing more liquidity to the economy than it has ever provided before. Both those things are changing. We no longer have these big increases in government spending. Government spending, it's still a big deficit, but the increase in spending has diminished significantly. And the Fed is tightening monetary policy and reversing slowly quantitative easing. Those things move the demand curve to the left. Here's the question. We know both those things are going to slow growth. Another supply shock, less demand, it's going to slow growth. Is growth going to slow so it's below zero? What we characterize as a recession. It could. Probably not this year. Probably not next year. We look at a number of leading indicators of recession. The best one is the shape of the yield curve. So we look at the Treasury yield curve, so you don't have to worry about credit risk. Presumably, the federal government's always going to pay back in loaner money. Well, a couple of weeks ago, one of the yield curves that financial market participants like to look at, they look at the spread between the 2-year Treasury note and the 10-year Treasury note. The 2-year note went above the 10-year and inverted yield curve. Well, it did it for 2 days, and the maximum was 6 basis points. Not long enough, not big enough. But a better predictor is a shorter term interest rate compared to the 10-year. I like to look at the 3-month Treasury bill versus the 10-year. You could look at the federal funds rate versus that to actually see what Fed policy is doing. It's not even close to being inverted. Okay? That spread is about 250, 275 basis points. It's really steep. The Fed hasn't tightened much yet. But right now it's telling us the conditions for a recession and inverted yield curve are not present. What happens? The Fed tightens, the federal funds rate gets up to 2.5% by the end of the year. 10 years at almost 3. Perhaps it's gone up too rapidly, perhaps it'll go up more. But the point is, the yield curve between that very short-term rate and the 10-year will be much smaller. That spread will be much smaller. Yield curve will be much flatter than it is today. Probably not inverted. Inverted yield curves are a great leading indicator about, it varies, but about 12 months in advance. How about next year? The Fed raises the federal funds rate as financial markets think up to, say, 3.25%. That might be higher than the 10-year at the end of next year. Particularly if financial markets think the economy is going to slow and long-term rates start to come down in anticipation of that. Well, this tells us that the concern about recession this year is probably misplaced. Probably misplaced for next year too. Although things can happen. But if next year, the second half of the year, we do get an inversion between the 3-month Treasury bill and the 10-year Treasury note, which we could, that tells us that maybe 2024 is looking like a year of far more concern. But not this year. How about inflation? You know, if that supply curve moves to the left, that demand curve moves down to the left, it doesn't tell you where inflation is going to go. Because if the supply curve moves more than the demand curve, inflation will go up. If the demand curve moves more than the supply curve, inflation will go down. In the short run, inflation may indeed move up a little bit more. But it's likely that we're close to the peak with inflation. And that demand curve is moving down, economy slowing, the world economy is slowing. Supply chains are healing slowly, but they will heal. Not as quickly as we'd like, they will heal. So, if I were grading this exam, I would say the A answer is, in the near term, growth will slow. We don't know if it's going to go below 0, but it won't go below 0 this year. We don't know what will happen with inflation, but it's probably going to go up some in the short run because that supply curve is going to move more than the demand curve. Once we get out later this year, particularly as we get out to next year, the demand curve is still going to be falling. Fed's still going to be tightening. Supply chains will start to heal. Inflation will come down. Not yet, but by the end of this year, we think inflation compared to a year earlier, 5.5%, 8.5%, and it may well go to 9% in another month, but that's probably going to be 5.5% is way too high. I said at the beginning, I think 2% is probably too high, but that's the Fed's goal. Will we get back to 2%? Oh, ultimately, we might. But it's not going to be anytime soon. When will oil prices go down again? Next worldwide recession, they'll go down. We want oil prices to go down before we have a recession. I don't know that they will. There are, because we've cut Russia off, appropriately so, there are, if you don't include Iran and Venezuela, there are 3 countries that could meaningfully increase production. The United States, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and UAE are not very happy with the US these days. They won't even take the president's call. So I'm not looking for them to increase production anytime soon. We could increase production in the US. The problem is, even though the administration is now asking for the oil companies to increase production, it's not something you turn on and turn off. It's expensive. Oil companies need some assurance that if they increase production, which is expensive, that they won't be told to stop production in a year. And right now, the regulatory framework does not support that. So we're probably not going to see much increase in production in the US as well. So it may be a while before inflation gets back to 2%. We really need those oil prices to come down. Other prices may come down. Now, if oil prices do come down, if you look at the futures prices for oil, the market expects at the end of this year crude oil to be down to the low $90 per barrel range. 105 right now. That's better. It's still high, but it's better. Next year, the market's looking for crude oil to be down to the low $80 per barrel. And it's still high, but it's better. So financial markets, people who are betting money on these things every day, think that oil prices will go down. And that will help inflation, in the second half of this year and next year, when inflation's still going to be high. So here we have the supply curve moving to the left, the demand curve moving to the left. We know we're going to get less growth. Not clear what will happen with inflation in the short run. But ultimately, if the supply curve moves back down, the demand keeps slowing because the Fed keeps tightening, inflation will move down. Now, can it move down by enough so that growth doesn't have to go below 0? There are a number of episodes where the Fed has been able to create what's called a soft landing. 66, 67, mid-80s, mid-90s. Fed tightened a lot in the 60s, but then changed policy. We didn't go into recession. Will that happen this time? It might, but none of those other periods were periods where we were experiencing a negative supply shock. That makes it much harder to get a successful soft landing. So while it's possible to get a soft landing this time, the odds don't favor. We probably won't. I hope I'm wrong on that forecast. But we've never had a soft landing with a negative supply shock. The inflation impulse has always been so big, the Fed has had to tighten so much that we went into recession. I fear the same thing will happen this time, again, perhaps in 2024. I hope I'm wrong on that, but we'll see. Then, of course, the slide that my lawyers make me put up there, which is the disclosure, which says it's all forecasts. All forecasts are wrong. Sometimes they're wrong by a lot. Sometimes they're not wrong by a lot, but always wrong. Don't bet real money on this. So that's all I have for right now. And you get to ask me questions in a little bit. So Rob, I'm going to bring you back up. Thank you all very much.
that was terrific. Audience, join me again in thanking David. Welcome to the podium, Dr. James Smith. Dr. Smith has been a chief economist for EconForecaster LLC since 1990 and an adjunct professor at UNC Kenan-Flagler Business School since 1988, which incidentally was sadly the last year of the Facts of Life. Jim also served as Parsec Financial chief economist for 14 years. In his more than 30 years as an economic forecaster, Jim has served in private industry, government, and academic institutions, including tenures at Wharton Econometrics, Union Carbide, the Federal Reserve Board, and the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Like David, Jim is also a past president and fellow of the National Association for Business Economics. Welcome back, Dr. Smith.
It's truly terrific to be here in person, see all these smiling faces. Who knows how many smiling faces are out there on their sofas or couches or what have you. I'm wearing a tie tonight. It's the Texas flag, in case you can't see it in the back. The reason is today is San Jacinto Day, or San Jacinto Day if you want to be more accurate in the pronunciation. In Spanish, 186 years ago today, Sam Houston and his ragtag crew of 1,200 Texans took on 6,000 or more Mexicans outside Houston. 9 Texans were killed, 832 Mexicans. Santa Anna dressed up like an old woman and tried to escape. He was captured. Sam Houston let him go, and the Republic of Texas was created. 10 years later, Texas joined the United States by treaty, the only country ever to do, the only state that ever was a separate country to do that. And one of the clever things in that treaty is if the people of Texas decide by vote to do it, Texas at any time could split into 5 states. So you could have 10 senators from Texas instead of only 2. Now it will never happen. It will never happen. Why? Because no real Texan will ever give up the Alamo. So we'll stay one state forever. 186 years. Today, if we had daily economic data, well, we have a lot of daily economic data, but we don't have daily GDP data. We don't even have monthly data. Canada does, the UK does, Finland does, and Japan does, but the US can't figure it out. Don't ask me why, I don't know. Actually, we can figure it out, but they don't want to spend the money to do it, is the actual truthful answer. But if we had daily data, today would be the seasonally adjusted, of course, the best day in the history of the United States, economically speaking. Tomorrow would be even better, the day after that, better than that, and so on and so on. Yes, we have occasional recessions. We've been having recessions ever since the Washington administration. We will have another recession someday. Not today, not tomorrow. You heard David, most likely not next year. Most likely not in 2024, because presidents try everything they can think of to avoid not being reelected because they cratered the economy. In fact, the only president I can think of who had a recession in his term was President Carter, and he didn't last. Only a one-term president. President Eisenhower did it to President Nixon, and a bunch of dead people in Chicago elected President Kennedy. But that's a story for a political science class, not for this one. So we're better off than we've ever been before. I personally believe that there has never been more economic uncertainty in the world at any other time in the last 80 years. I think you would have to go back to 1942, when it was totally unclear how World War II was going to come out. I watched the movie Midway earlier this week, and that was a turning point and a miracle. One guy, basically, well, two. The one guy was the intelligence officer who had actually met Yamamoto when this officer was stationed in Japan and spoke fluent Japanese, a code breaker who worked with him, and Admiral Nimitz, who said, how sure are you this is what they're going to do? And the guy, who was generally quiet and mild manners, said they're coming from that direction at 7:30 in the morning on whatever day it was, April something, and he missed it by 5 minutes and 4 degrees. We were ready, sank all their aircraft carriers, got some momentum. But really wasn't until after D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944, turned out to be successful. There's so many uncertainties in the world. I don't have, David listed a few of them: Ukraine invasion, commodity prices. He gave you about 4 of them. There's a list of 1,000 other commodities. They're all in turmoil. There's an enormous problem, well, there was $1.25 billion, enormous problems in China. But the biggest one right now is they have a bad strategy of fighting COVID. Let's shut everything down. It didn't work when they tried it in Wuhan 2 years ago, and it doesn't work now. That is Shanghai. 1/3 of the Chinese economy is shut. That means that whatever's supposed to be in the containers, on the ocean, going all over the world, that will arrive over the next 4 to 8 weeks, people are going to open those containers and say, where are thee? And somebody in China is going to say, we don't know, because we haven't been in our factory for weeks. We don't know where our workers are. We don't know if they're still alive. So there's another supply shock coming that's going to make the chip shortage look like peanuts. Oh, the chip shortage has been going on for 2 years, and there's no end in sight. There is no end in sight. And any of you have tried to buy a car, you know, the price has gone. Now, the good news is if you decided to quit driving and sell your car, you found out that for many, many people, their car is worth more than they paid for it. As many as 5 years ago. I bought my car 18 years ago, still driving it. They don't make them anymore. I like shifting gears. I don't like aiming. I like driving. It's worth 85% of what I paid for it in the summer of 2003. So the 85%. So, you know, normally your car depreciates. It did for a while, but it's been going up a lot. And it's essentially in mint condition. It's well maintained. So we're in much better shape than you hear. We're going to stay in much better shape than you hear. I'm going to tell you a lot of things to think about. David told you the most important thing. Do not worry about a recession until you see the yield curve from the short end to the 10-year or even the 30-year fully invert. That means long rates below short rates, as he told you, and stay inverted 4 months or longer. 2 hours or 2 days on a piece of a yield curve is Wall Street Mickey Mouse. It doesn't mean anything. Don't pay any attention to it. And until you see the yield curve invert and stay inverted 4 months or longer, don't worry about a recession. That has foretold every time that inversion has happened in 122 years. There has been followed by a recession, usually within a year, but sometimes a little longer, sometimes a little sooner. There have been 4 recessions not preceded by an inverted yield curve. All of them were right before or right after World War II. One was caused by the Federal Reserve, the 1937-38 recession, in a literally unbelievable, what were they thinking moment. We're coming out of the Great Depression, right? 25% unemployment, all those things you see Steinbeck novels, et cetera, et cetera. Horrible, horrible period of time, except my parents, because I wasn't born yet, nor was my younger sister, always tell me it was the greatest time in their lives. What is their message? Anyway, they're long deceased, but the reason was they were both working. They owned a house. They owned 2 cars, which was unheard of in the 1930s, and whatever they wanted to do, they did. Didn't have to think about babysitters or diapers or any of those things, which all of us parents know well. Anyway, the Fed decided growth was too high. Let's double the reserve requirements on banks. Literally double. Total surprise. Nobody saw it coming. Boom, double reserve requirements. Economy down the drain. 1945, economy's been booming. Through the war is about to wind down. We're frantically converting from defense production to civilian production. Again, recession. Very short, very mild, very predictable. It had nothing to do with yield curves because there was no yield curve in the 1940s because there was a Treasury-Fed accord in which the Fed said, yes, Mr. Roosevelt, we'll do whatever it takes to make sure that we win the war, which meant don't mess with interest rates. And there was no monetary policy in 1941, 1948, 49. Growth was too strong. Euphoria reigned. No known tree has ever grown to the sky, ever. And so when you see, well, it's going to take a growth rate like this to make that pay off, then don't invest in it, because it ain't going to pay off. It's going to crash. You can see many examples of that all the time. Finally, 1953, exactly the same as 1945, we ramped up for the Korean War, and then it was over. It wasn't over, it's not over yet, never signed a peace treaty, but at least we have a truce, and a war ended right where it started. With those are the only 4 exceptions. Every other recession, 1900 to date, through 2020, it's 2 years this week since the expansion started, by the way. So we're now 2 years into the next, which I predict will be a record-breaking expansion for a lot of reasons. When we get through this turmoil, people are going to think a lot about, gee, that supply chain that stretched 8,000 miles to make sure everything arrived just in time. It might make more sense to spend a little more money for a factory down the road. You know, look at all the foreign auto plants in the United States, anywhere in the United States, and their supply chains, and they're much shorter than U.S. companies, much shorter. There's an enormous number of companies in North Carolina that supply the BMW plant in Greer. And that's not, a lot in South Carolina too, and Georgia and Alabama. And the same goes for Mercedes and everybody else. And soon we won't be able to say there are no car manufacturing plants in North Carolina because, and what really is the weirdest story I've seen on the front page in a long time, is we are going to have the largest car maker from Vietnam. I didn't even know there was one. Building cars in Cary, North Carolina. If you don't know about Cary, North Carolina, that's C-A-R-Y, containment area for recycled Yankees. And I used to live in Chapel Hill, and we're full of jokes about, Cheshevskyville and other places like that, Cary, and so on and so forth. Yeah, you've got some, I know. Anyway, the economy's looking good. It's going to look better. It looks better than anyone has ever seen on the employment front. nationwide, last month, these data lag by 1 month, they're called the JOLTS data, Job Openings, Leavings, Turnover Survey, JOLTS. Nationwide, 1.6 job openings, 1.6 job openings for every unemployed person. That means everybody, now you have to remember, being unemployed means you don't have a job, you're age 16 or over, and you want a job. If you're age 16 and over and you don't want a job, you're not in the labor force. So you have to want a job. 1.6 job openings for every single unemployed person. So we can put them all to work, and we still have millions of job openings. What is it in this area? The Asheville metropolitan area is Buncombe County, Haywood County, Henderson County, and one more, which will come Madison County. There are hardly any people there, but it is Madison County, Hot Springs and Marshall and so on. 4 job openings for every unemployed person. 4 job openings. Now what happens, people move here and get a job, and then they find out they can't find anywhere to live. And so that's a problem. You know, we have the highest house prices, the most amazing, WLS did a feature the other day about, somebody that owned a particular apartment complex, 238 apartments, I remember. Somebody just moved out and it took them 15 minutes to get a new tenant. That's not atypical, and we're not the only place in the United States that's experiencing that particular kind of crunch. But it's very, very bad, and it's hard for people to move to an area that they can't afford to live in. I understand that. But obviously, with this kind of pressure to find employees, wages are rising strongly, pretty much across the board. Now, if you're a skilled tradesperson, you can weld, you can run different kinds of machine tools, you're an electrician, you're employable, and people are lining up to hire you. If you majored in Slavic languages, you might have a bigger problem. Or even less job-worthy. If you pick the right Slavic language, you might be a real, you're a Russian, Ukrainian speaker, you might be very popular in certain parts of the world, although I'm not sure you would want to live there. Every morning when we get up, my wife and I thank her grandparents for leaving what is now Ukraine 120 years ago, when Ukraine was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and there were other problems in those days that caused them to leave, but fortunately they did, and came to the United States and had children, and those children met, and eventually my wife was born. So but ancestors definitely from what is now Ukraine. That war will end. No wars go on forever. Who knows how it will end? President Zelensky of Ukraine is one of the most amazing, heroic people that no one would have predicted. The guy is a Jewish comedian. Like, really. And funny. And an actor. Well, we had an actor who was president, and he did pretty well. So, things may improve. Another area David mentioned that is improving is the federal budget deficit. Primarily because Congress split 50-50 in the Senate, 5 votes positive for Democrats in the House. Basically can't do anything unless a vast majority agree. If they all agree, is let's kick Russia out of most favored nation, 100-0 in the Senate. Pretty good, Normally that's an idiot bill, but this one, obviously, most people agreed with. But the 2017 tax cuts, which start expiring January 1, certain parts of them, most of them are not permanent, were phenomenally successful in raising money beyond what anyone predicted. Wall Street Journal editorial, I think yesterday, had all the data on an unbelievable increase in corporate income taxes paid. Two reasons. One, the low rates really just made it more attractive, but two, no tax on repatriating profits from outside the United States. So more than $2 trillion came back from overseas to fund, and that's helping, has been and will be helping shorten supply chains. It does cost more to make most things in the United States, so there's not a huge national security reason why you need to make it here. You can see the attractiveness of making it somewhere else, not only China, but Vietnam, India, Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. So we can do that. Costs will go down. The administration can do a lot to let us not only drill from Moroa, but build pipelines to transmit it. They won't do that. They issued new regulations yesterday. Those regulations will prevent any green investments. You can't put in a windmill farm, you can't put in solar panels, and you damn sure can't drill an oil well or build a pipeline or natural gas liquefaction facility. We have more than enough natural gas in the United States to supply Europe. We need to liquefy it, put it on tankers, ship it over there. We can't do that without permits. There were 6, I think, LNG plants that have been hung up between EPA and Interior and Department of Energy, and now these new regulations just will make it worse. But we have elections coming up in November, and more elections coming up 2 years from November. There will be many changes. Who knows what they will be, because the environment will change. If you're happy and you know it, if you're not happy, you let them know it. A lot of politicians are going to be very surprised this November and a lot more in November 2024. But we can talk about more of that in future crystal balls. This is my 34th crystal ball appearance. I missed the first 2 because I didn't know they existed, and Joe didn't know I existed, so no way we could have gotten that together. One of Joe's grad school classmates is an economist named Bob Wirtz, who's a friend of David's and mine, and they had a hole, they couldn't fill it. Bob said, well, I know this crazy economist down in Texas. I was at the University of Texas running your business research. Let's see if we can get him up to Asheville. So I came up and we had this thing, and, it was over behind the pottery class in the Leader Center. You had to walk through all these, potter's wheels and clay things and so on and so forth. And then he kept inviting me back, and I kept coming. And then one year, somebody couldn't do it, Mickey Williams, so I called David and said, hey, you want to come down and do this? So he's been doing it 25 years or so, and he sent placements a couple times. And I wasn't here last year. I wanted to be here. I would have really liked to be here, but I was recuperating from open heart surgery, and I've seen a video of that, and recuperating is the operative word, because they take a big saw and slice you up like this, and do all this stuff. I'm really glad I was knocked out. I don't think it would have been fun to feel it or experience it, but obviously it all works. It's a modern America. Well, it's not even all that modern. We have good friends who had similar operations 22 years ago. So I think things are much better than you hear. Jobs are plentiful and easy to get. That's a question that the conference board asks in every survey. That number would have been off the charts, but they changed the scale on the chart. Never been higher in the, 60 years or so history of that. The Michigan survey goes back to 1946, but they don't ask whether the specific wording, which I think is brilliant. Do you think jobs are plentiful and easy to get, or scarce and hard to find? And the difference between those two is it's higher than it's ever been before. Consumer confidence is not very high. It's been going down a lot, and Rob alluded to that. The reasons are inflation scares people, particularly retired people, because they can't go out and demand more. You know, the only pension that's adjusted for inflation is Social Security. Private sector pensions are not adjusted for inflation for good reasons. They bankrupt the companies. You know, companies did that, people would sell their stock and they would be in bad trouble. So it's not an economically sensible thing. I guess for your class, Rob, theologically, it's beautiful. So with that, I'll stop, because I know I can see people writing down their questions already. And I know you're going to moderate the questions, or but thank you. It's great to be back.
All right, thank you, Jim. Let's get a round of applause for Jim. Stand up here, right? No seats.
No seats. Stand.
So we've got about 13 minutes, and I would love to hear from the audience at home, but these folks here came, and since we've only got 13 minutes, if you have a question, line up right over there, and to ask your question, we'd love to hear from you.
There's a microphone. Here comes Doc.
I've got one in the chat if somebody doesn't.
Where do you line up?
Right there, Doc. Here's a familiar face. Been to one or two of these before.
Sure enough. A lot of times you talk about household formations.
Right.
And I just wondered what that's looked like recently, what you think that's going to be over the next couple of years, and its effect on the economy.
Households are the fundamental economic unit in the United States. Household could be one person, it could be a family of people, but it's an independent living group. The problem is that the data were greatly impacted by the COVID downturn. We know that when you do political polls, you used to call people, get a bias sample. A lot of people don't have phones. People won't answer their phones. So the folks at the Census Bureau actually go out and knock on doors. Well, they didn't do that during COVID, or they didn't do very much of that during COVID. In fact, at the beginning of COVID, it showed that the number of households just soared, which that almost certainly didn't happen. People moved back together and form independent households. We're finally starting to see household data that is not impacted by what happened during COVID. Household formations appear to be reasonably strong. That's part of the reason why house prices and apartment rent prices are going up so much. Every household has to live somewhere. That's the definition of households, independent living unit group. So they're pushing up the demand for houses, pushing up the demand for apartments. Now, it's helping push up housing starts. Builders see that there's a demand for the product. They're hiring workers, they're paying wages. People are earning more because of that. It's positive for the economy. In fact, over the long run, there are only two sources of growth in the economy. Growth of the labor force, tied to households, and productivity growth. So if you don't get those, the economy's not going to grow. No other source of long-term growth. So we are seeing a pickup in household formations. It's good for the economy. We need the supply side to respond to that pickup in households.
I know you're a housing expert, and I'm wondering if you were wanting to buy a house now in a place where the market is really difficult, which is many places, is there any argument for waiting? I understand that mortgage rates are going up, and I wonder what you predict for the future of housing prices.
Well, Don, you asked two different questions there. You asked, what do I think about house prices, and do I think people should wait? The answers are not necessarily the same. You should buy a house if you want a house. You shouldn't buy a house if you want to live in it, if you're buying it for investment purposes. Then it's an investment. It's not a place to live. So the answer to the first question is, if you're a person or a family or a household that wants the things that owning a house gives you, that living with relatives or friends or renting doesn't give you, you should buy a house. House prices. The house prices are going up faster than they did during the housing boom of 2003 to 2007. Actually, substantially faster. Does that mean we've got a crash coming? Doesn't mean we've got a crash coming. Could we have a crash? Sure, anything can happen. We could have a crash. Is it likely? No. Because the reasons for house price growth, rapid growth, when it says supply and demand, are different today than they were then. It was still supply and demand, but a lot of people bought houses then for investment purposes. They buy a house and fix it up a little bit and then flip it. Don't see much of that anymore. And demand went up because the mortgage industry made it so easy to borrow. It's not easy to borrow now. It's not hard to borrow. It's an average. It's about where it should be in that regard. But it's not easy. We used to joke that the only test we need to pass to get a mortgage in housing boom was a mirror test. Mirror test. Perhaps put a mirror on your nose. Yeah, 5's up if you're alive. Congratulations, you get a mortgage. It wasn't much harder than that. It's much harder than that now. Why are house prices going up so rapidly? Because the supply is so low. There have never been, we've got data back to the early 80s. Just look at single-family existing homes. Existing homes are the biggest part of the market. There have never been fewer existing homes for sale than there are right now. Yeah, there's a strong demand. Housing starts have picked up significantly. Builders are doing what they can, but builders have supply constraints. They can't get the workers they need to build houses. They can't get the things they need to build houses. And there aren't a lot of buildable lots in most parts of the country. So it's a supply-demand imbalance where there's simply not enough supply. We need more houses built and more apartments built. So I think, 15 to 20% gains are not sustainable. They'll slow. Housing demand will fall off. That doesn't mean that housing demand is going to fall so much that house prices are going to go down. They may go down in some places. They always do in recessions. But national house price declines are very rare. They occurred 2008 to 2010 because of the things that caused them to go up so much then. Those things are not present now.
Those were the first times since the Great Depression that house prices decline. Veterans can get houses with no down payment if they're approved by the VA. So it's one advantage to being a veteran. If you live in Haywood County or Madison County or parts of Henderson County, or many other parts, anywhere else in western North Carolina, you can get a mortgage from the U.S. Department of Agriculture if you're in a rural area, not in town. And those also are low down payment and subsidized. And just anecdotally, my wife still cannot believe, about a year ago, we refinanced for 2.5%. So we saw the story on WLOS the other night on the rent for 2-bedroom apartments here in Asheville, and our 3,000 square foot house payment, including taxes and insurance and the escrow account, is about 25% less than a 2-bedroom apartment. so we probably won't be selling anytime soon.
Thank you for your great talks.
Thank you for being here, yes, ma'am.
So you've talked about
You
China.
gotta go to the, there's people, people at home who cannot hear.
As Andrew comes up to the mic, there was actually one that came through the chat that's real quick. I think that it's directed to Jim from Carbide in Atlanta.
Oh, yeah, okay.
There you go. He says, Jim, is there an underappreciated economic indicator that you personally find to be a valuable resource?
It's probably the University of Michigan. I know you're a Michigan State grad, Fred, so sorry, but the University of Michigan Index of Consumer Sentiment, which comes out twice a month, a preliminary and a final, as I said. It's been coming out since 1946. It's been tremendously accurate in predicting consumer spending. And consumer spending is 70% of GDP in the United States, so it's really, really important. Retail sales are about half of that, so the rest. And GM, Fred's former employer, heavily subsidizes the Michigan survey, so that should make them feel a little better.
As a graduate, got my master's PhD from the University of Michigan, not Michigan State, I can ask the question, why did God create Michigan State? No, there's an answer. Because the farmers needed a place to go to school. Sorry, Fred. But you knew that was coming.
We have about 4 minutes. I want to go over to Andrew.
Thank you guys for being here. My first year attending was last year. Nice to be in person with you all. My question is, again, about the housing market. Seems to be popular. Now, I realize that the top line numbers from both of you seem pretty good. But the consumer confidence number is looking rough. As somebody who is on the lower end of the income spectrum, I've been able to successfully pay my landlord's mortgage for 15 years. As a gig worker, I have not been able to pay my own mortgage, even when that could have been possibly cheaper and more affordable for me to do so. I also noticed that the numbers for first-time homebuyers are extremely low right now. And that is a traditional ladder to future economic success. How do you tie all these things? Do you tie these things together like me, is what I'm saying, as far as how this generation that's not buying homes might be a little unconfident about the future?
So let me start by saying I think that's a huge public policy problem. We need people to be able to become homeowners. That has historically been one of the keys to wealth creation over time. And particularly if you also can't afford an apartment, you better find good people to double up with, right? Well, that's not what we want you to be able to do. We need more housing units built. We gotta lower the cost. We need to increase the availability of workers for that. A lot of those workers historically have not been US citizens. And we need state and local governments to allow more houses to go on. None of those things will get solved in the short term. Now, Fannie Mae does a very good survey quarterly of various things housing related. And after the great financial crisis, housing activity was pretty low. It was hard to get a mortgage. And just like now, there weren't a lot of first-time buyers. So they did a lot of surveys asking millennials, want to own a home? Have you given up on that? It turned out, and the answer is still the same now. They want to buy just as badly as their older brothers and sisters and their parents did. Before this most recent rise in prices and mortgage rates, it was at least achievable. And indeed, before the COVID recession, we started to see a substantial increase in millennial buyers and first-time buyers, suggesting that indeed they were following through on what it was they said that they wanted to do. Affordability today is much lower than it has been in recent years. It's still much higher than it's been over much of the last 50 years. It seems amazing that but it is true. It doesn't mean everybody can buy a house. It might mean that you have to buy a much smaller house, or a house that is a fixer-upper, or a house in a less desirable neighborhood. But affordability, while down, is not down and out. It's still much higher than it was, because mortgage rates are entirely different. They've gone up to 5%. Well, when I bought my first house, Ann Arbor was 7.5%. We thought that was high. Then I got my first teaching job in LA, and our mortgage rate was 17%. Now that's a mortgage rate. So 5%, yes, it is a problem for people now. I don't mean to minimize it. But we got through 17% mortgage rates, we got people in homes. With some better public policy, we'll get through this too. But it's not going to be something that gets solved in the next year or two.
I got a mortgage commitment in June 1980 for 12.5%. I was building a new house, so it didn't close till after Thanksgiving. I had 12.5% locked in. The banker literally cried because the going rate was 18.5%.
It was probably costing the bank 20%.
Oh, yeah.
Your 12%.
Yeah, 20% to lend me money for 12.5%. But it was a contract, they had no choice. But 5% still looks good. 2% looks even more.
I do have a couple of questions, but I'm gonna let, if David and Jim don't mind answering
Yeah,
the
we can
questions
go.
afterwards, we'll do it individually, if you all don't mind. I just want to respect everybody's time and let you know this was a great event. If you want to stay around and talk a couple minutes, you're welcome to. I think it's great that Colton Groome has come on board and here to support this, and I'm so glad they're here. I'm so glad that David and Jim have come back to us, and every year it has been such a delight. I learn stuff every time. I have some questions to ask myself, but I know where they're going to be after this, and I'm going to tell you. And so I'll ask them my questions. I don't want any paparazzi around, all right? So don't follow us. But it's been such a great thing. And to the folks online, it's so glad that you are joining us as well. Have a great night. See you all next year.